Thank you, Monica. So, to our last speaker of the day, before our performance, I'd like to invite Joanne Morra, reader in Art History and Theory at Central St Martin's, UAL. Joanne is, as well as that, also running the doctoral platform at CSM and is a founding principal editor of the Journal of Visual Culture. She's published widely on modern and contemporary art in, for instance, New Formations, Art History, Journal of Modern Art, What is Research in the Visual Arts, and recent activities include the exhibition Saying It at the Freud Museum in London 2012, and Intimacy Unguarded, autobiography, biography, memoir with Emma Talbot since 2013. 50 years of art and objecthood with Alison Green, and that's for Journal of Visual Cultures in 2017. Joanne's book, Inside the Freud Museum's History, Memory and Site-Responsive Art with IB Tauris, will be out later this year.
Okay, thanks, Zoe. Last paper. Last paper of the day. So I hope everybody still has the energy for this, and I'm really looking forward to Rosemary's performance after this. I just wanted to give two quick frames to the paper I'm going to give you a sense of context. So the first one is that I've been interested for quite some time on the relationship between different spaces of practice, particularly looking at the psychoanalytic consulting room and its relationship to the artist's studio, the writer's study, the gallery or museum, and most recently the classroom. And I'm interested in thinking about the technical aspects of psychoanalysis, beginning with Freud's papers on technique, so how analysis is begun, ideas like working through, transference, dream work, interminability of analysis, and if those processes have any relationship between what happens in the studio, the study, the art gallery, and the classroom. And the idea is to look at relationships that are analogous, but also to try to keep the singularity of what takes place in those different spaces. Okay, so that's kind of the overall thing that I've been looking at for a while. And this paper is from a more specific project, which is the book Inside the Freud Museums, which looks at the Freud Museums in London and Vienna and their relationship to contemporary art and the history, theory, and practice of psychoanalysis. And the actual cases the objects that I'm looking at in this particular talk are a photograph that is in the Freud Museum London archive and the Louise Bourgeois exhibition that took place a few years ago at the Freud Museum London, which is one of about 90 exhibitions that the Freud Museum London has held since 1989. It had its first show. So that's the context for the talk. Being with Freud. Sometime in November 1937, a rather extraordinary photograph was taken of writer and practicing psychoanalyst Princess Marie Bonaparte filming her friend and analyst Sigmund Freud. From entries in Freud's diary, we know that during this winter, Marie Bonaparte visited Freud for her ongoing psychoanalysis. She arrived at Bergassa 19 in Vienna with her daughter Eugenie, who was about to commence her own psychoanalytic treatment with Freud. The photograph shows Freud sitting behind his desk in his study, surrounded by his antiquities, his manuscripts, and 2 bouquets of fresh flowers. He is turning away from his work and those beloved objects of antiquity that guided him in his writing, and facing his patient and friend. Bonaparte is crouching down behind and to one side of Freud's desk and is looking through an early movie camera that she had recently purchased. The viewfinder is resting against her left eye, her fingers are placed on its controls, and the apparatus is aimed at Freud. We don't know if she is filming Freud, but she is certainly posing for the photograph, as is her analyst. Eugenie took the photograph, and together the three actors have constructed a moment for us to view and consider. What is fascinating about this image is what we see: the apparatus for looking, the moving camera, the operator of the camera, Bonaparte, and the object of her gaze, Freud, caught by the photographer, Eugenie. This mise-en-scène makes it a compelling representation of representing, a photograph of a filmic encounter, specifically an encounter between Bonaparte and Freud. In addition to this rather remarkable portrait of looking and representing, there is an intensity captured between the filmmaker and the sitter, as each holds the gaze of the other. This photograph is less a portrait of Freud or of Bonaparte filming Freud, although that is rather marvelous, and more a documentation of Marie Bonaparte's engagement with Freud. It is an image that tells us a great deal about Bonaparte's response to being with Freud, perhaps even a response to a cherished, intimate encounter with Freud. The focal point of this photograph, unlike most portraits of Freud, is not the elder psychoanalyst, but his analysand, Marie Bonaparte. More specifically, the image rests on the relationship between the analysand and her analyst, between Bonaparte and Freud. Perhaps it is representing a moment of analytic transference, a positive transference. Looking up at Freud with adoration, we witness the patient's unconscious desire for her analyst as it rises to the surface and is captured in this representation. In a sense, then, Bonaparte has been photographed inside the psychoanalytic stage. One of the Freud Museum London's most pressing provocations is to do with what has been captured in this photograph, to encourage its artists and visitors to enter the psychoanalytic stage, to walk into a museum and somehow at the same time walk into Sigmund and Anna Freud's consulting rooms. This is certainly a part of the museum's hagiographic power, its ability to make us believe we are in an active, living consulting room in which the psychoanalyst has momentarily stepped out of it. As we wander through the rooms, we wait for the analyst to return. A group of exhibitions carry this fiction forward for us because the artworks rely on fragments and traces of the artist's own life, anecdotes, stories, memories, and objects that once inside the Freud Museum respond to the psychoanalytic context of the site to create a fictional narrative of the artist in analysis. In this talk, I will consider one intervention, the exhibition of Louise Bourgeois' work entitled Return of the Repressed from 2012. This exhibition included a set of artworks and, importantly, a selection of Bourgeois' extensive writings around her experience of being in psychotherapy. I've chosen this intervention because, unlike most exhibitions that invoke the figure and work of Sigmund Freud, this show introduces us to the history of psychoanalysis after Freud and the work of Melanie Klein. Acting Out, The Return of the Repressed. In 2004 and 2010, Louise Bourgeois' assistant, Jerry Gorowoy, discovered over 1,000 loose-leaf sheets of writing in the artist's Chelsea home in New York City. These notes, which included both texts and images, related to the more than 30 years of psychoanalytic treatment that Bourgeois undertook between 1951 and 1985. This is a dramatic discovery given Bourgeois' long-standing public criticism of psychoanalysis. To begin to make sense of this archive and its position within Bourgeois' oeuvre, art historian and curator Philip Larratt-Smith brought together many of these papers along with an extensive array of Bourgeois' artworks for the landmark exhibition, The Return of the Repressed. The exhibition was first shown in a large museum in Argentina and then traveled to Brazil, with a small portion of works shown at the Freud Museum London in 2012. Small, very big portion. The intervention that took place within the Freud Museum included 79 items, which is a really vast number of artworks and pieces of writing to be exhibited in the rather small and already very full space of 20 Marsfield Gardens. The site-responsive affect of this crowded intervention constituted something rather extraordinary. On the one hand, we were given access to documents and artworks that would transform our collective understanding of Bourgeois' art practice and its psychoanalytic dimensions. On the other hand, the curation of the show particularly the choice and density of the material, produced an intense love-hate experience or affect of being with the work. Confined and held in the Freud Museum's powerful psychoanalytic and domestic setting, the engagement with Bourgeois' intimate and formidable accounts of her feminine subjectivity took on a complex psychoanalytic experience of acting out. In order to unpack this, it is helpful to focus on Bourgeois' psychoanalytic writings that dominated the exhibition's affect. By having these personal writings framed and displayed, they turned into a form, and they were turned into a form of artwork. The writings speak to the many sides of someone we know as Louise Bourgeois. In one of these documents, we read Bourgeois' witty, fulsome, and powerful assessment of her psychoanalysis. The analysis is a jib, is a trap, is a job, is a privilege, is a luxury, is a duty towards myself, my husband, my parents, my children, mine, is a shame, is a farce, is a love affair, is a rendezvous, is a cat and mouse game, is a boat to drive, is an internment, is a joke, makes me powerless, makes me into a cop, is a bad dream, is my interest, is my field of study, is more than I can manage, makes me furious, is a bore, is a nuisance, is a pain in the neck. And I think that perfectly summarizes what it's like to be in analysis. I think she got that one totally right. In another piece of her psychoanalytic writings, we encounter Bourgeois' her wants. I want to get, I want to keep, I want to say, I want to tell, I want to see, I want to learn, I want to know, I want to know, I want to control, I want to hold, I want to feel, I want to remember, I want to go, I want, I want to find, I want to finish, I want to get rid of, I want to clean, I want to be good, I want to be better, I want to do it, I want to show, I want to outdo, I want to top it, I want to accomplish mastery. And the insistent and constant writing continues for another 4 pages of wants. All 5 pages, handwritten, are framed and hung side by side. Close by, we also encounter her sense of failure. Step number 4. I have failed as a wife, as a woman, as a mother, as a hostess, as an artist, as a businesswoman, as any 47, as a friend, as a daughter, as a sister. I have not failed as a truth seeker, lowest ebb. And then we read Bourgeois' note. When I do not attack, I do not feel myself alive. This form of writing continued unabated throughout the exhibition. We know that Bourgeois was extremely well read in psychoanalysis. She has references in her writings to Freud, Marie Bonaparte, Anna Freud, Melanie, Klein, Jacques Lacan, to name just a few. We also know that Bourgeois first saw her psychoanalyst, Dr. Henry Lowenfeld, after the death of her father in 1951. This loss resulted in a deep depression that lasted over a decade, during which time Bourgeois was unable to produce any artwork. The first 10 years of the artist's psychoanalytic treatment enabled her to come out of her depression and make art once more. At the same time, the therapy confirmed Bourgeois' sense of herself as a psychoanalytic subject, specifically a Kleinian subject. As psychoanalyst and feminist Juliette Mitchell argues in her analysis of Bourgeois' psychoanalytic writings, the artist was able to use her symptoms, and she's using the word use in a Winnicottian sense, in a psychoanalytic sense, to continue to make her work. Mitchell notices the writings are filled with what she says, an imbrication of various and multiple preoccupations, such as would arise within a clinical session. By focusing on Bourgeois' articulation of violent jealousy in these writings, Mitchell concludes that if psychoanalysis is a process through which the patient is relieved of their symptoms as a means of being cured, then Bourgeois' treatment, and this is Mitchell, cured her of nothing, nor should it have done. She used it to become an important artist. The talismanic precept of psychoanalytic treatment is, where id unconscious is, there ego conscious shall come to be. For Bourgeois it was, where id unconscious is, there shall the sculpture consciousness come to be. The paradox that Mitchell is highlighting is the way in which Bourgeois worked with the knowledge that The paradox that Mitchell is highlighting is the way in which Bourgeois worked with the knowledge that making manifest her repressed emotions, such as her jealousy and rage, within her psychoanalysis meant getting better. But if that were to happen, her artwork would suffer, as these repressed emotions fueled the creative process for her. Thus, Bourgeois' conflict was knowing that getting better and becoming a significant artist were in tension, and that's Mitchell. Because of this tension, Mitchell is attuned to the frequent references in Bourgeois' writings to acting out rather than working through. In acting out rather than working through, Bourgeois was able to, and this is the next quote, keep the emotions raw and alive, because her sculpture was to make conscious what we all experience unconsciously. She thus has to have more, not fewer, of her symptoms. Both bad and good experiences must be intensified. She goes into what is unbearable, unknowable, which is why it is repressed, and makes it conscious in visual form. Art historian Mignon Nixon takes a different tact to Juliet Mitchell. Nixon traces the letter L in Bourgeois psychoanalytic writings, L for Louise and L for her analyst Lowenfeld. Tracing this letter and its meanings, Nixon uncovers the way in which Bourgeois' politically and ethically charged artwork and her psychoanalysis function in relation to the complex machinations of the Kleinian subject. Feelings of aggression and violence are followed by anxiety, guilt, and fear, and then the need for reparation. This is the case because, as Nixon explains, Bourgeois holds herself to account daily, even hourly, in a painstaking catalogue of self-examination, duly acknowledging the pleasures of her own beastliness and the pain of its boomerang effects. Unsparing, but never self-lacerating, Bourgeois recounts the psychic facts of life, the destructive impulses in one's life. Nixon concludes by proposing that Bourgeois' relationship to her psychoanalysis is a form of negative transference. For Klein, negative transference is at the center of analysis. Feelings of violence, aggression, anxiety, and guilt are key. Spending long periods of time in this exhibition and with this writing and work meant spending time with, on the one hand, forthright, aggressive, demanding, claustrophobic, and exhausting objects and texts, and on the other hand, being consumed, surprised, delighted, and stimulated by the thought-provoking truth that was being presented. The dichotomy that the show affected opened up the consideration that there may be a correlation between the use to which Bourgeois put her psychoanalytic treatment, a use that enabled an acting out, and the way in which the work and show acted out and used the site, the Freud Museum, and the viewer, us. How so? Bourgeois was aware of the dilemma she faced as a modern artist, a need for psychological release, and an audience to witness that release. She wrote, "The drawing is the most basic psychologique release. The modern artist is caught in a dilemma in that he considers art as a psychological release and at the same time wants to have an audience." As a viewer, we are members of that audience of whom Bourgeois speaks, and so was the museum. In entering The Return of the Repressed inside the Freud Museum, we move into a condensed version of Bourgeois' already complex world. Layer upon layer of material objects, artworks, words, and memories come together to create an almost claustrophobic space. This is the result of the artwork and writing itself, as well as the enclosed and restrictive space of the museum. A space that, when filled to the brim with intense work, such as Bourgeois', leaves the viewer little room to escape, psychologically, emotionally, and literally, for a breath of fresh air. The site, with its intense psychoanalytic history and memories bearing down on the viewer, as well as the intimacy of the space as a domestic and analytic one, results in a compressed relationship to Bourgeois' writing and artwork, and this work gives us no relief. There are so many verbal, visual, and tactile objects, images, and texts in the exhibition, and so much intensity. Artworks are fragmented, broken, missing parts, in bits and pieces. The artist's writing is strong, aggressive, overwhelming. Slowly moving through the intervention, looking, reading, listening, seeing, engaging, remembering, sympathizing, retracting, shaking one's head in astonishment and disbelief, and then in recognition and empathy, a viewer, such as myself, finds herself repositioning her emotions from sympathy and acknowledgement to hostility and anger, back and forth, over and over again. The experience is dramatically conflictual. We are subsumed into Bourgeois' world, the dramatic world of a Kleinian subject. The intensity of encountering this show inside the Freud Museum results in a love-hate encounter with Bourgeois' art and writing practices. Following Nixon, in writing, we are witnessing a form of negative transference. Following Mitchell, the experience is not one of working through, but acting out. Is it then the case that the love-hate relationship that we experience when encountering the show in the Freud Museum is one that rehearses the acting out of a negative transference? As a complicated form of what I call autobiographical fiction, it is as though the artwork, documents, and exhibition are acting out the complex situation that Bourgeois negotiated all of her life. And as a viewer, I was giving it back, loving it and hating it, both at the same time. In conclusion, I wonder if the psychoanalyst Adam Phillips is not right. Phillips has written the provocative statement that those who want to continue misleading themselves about the past write autobiographies. Those who want to know themselves and their history have psychoanalysis. His point is that when undertaking psychoanalysis, the repetition of the actions and stories we practice and tell ourselves are broken down, then rebuilt, told differently. That is how we stop misleading ourselves about the past and come to know something of ourselves and our history. Clearly, the access I have been granted by Bourgeois and Bonaparte is to a representation of herself, each of them, that each constructed through a form of autobiographical fiction. The photograph in Bourgeois' writing attests to something that is personal. Bonaparte's relationship to Freud, Bourgeois' understanding of herself as a Kleinian subject. At the same time, there are representations that attest to the fictional nature of representation. Each time we write or speak the word I, we encounter something of ourselves and construct ourselves. Certainly, both art and psychoanalysis have a transformative potential and alter one another. But ultimately, because art is not a psychoanalysis, a psychotherapy, and a psychotherapy or psychoanalysis is not art, what we are presented with are autobiographical fictions. Thank you.